Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are working on a 2008 Toyota Sienna. Customer complaint is at random, driving down the road, the rear air conditioner, even though the knob is turned off, the rear air conditioner will start blowing on full speed. But she was able to wedge something into the knob for the rear AC on the front control panel and get the system to quit acting up. So here's the rear control knob. She has a dog tag kind of wedged in there to keep the knob tight. And that has prevented it from blowing randomly on full blast. So let's go ahead and remove the temporary fix. And nothing's happened so far, but let's wiggle the knob. That knob is really loose. I mean, and she's absolutely correct. I just barely, move the knob and stuff starts happening. Now it's off. Full blast, off. Now this is a very similar problem to what the Toyota Highlanders have, and I have a video where I showed the repair on this as well. We're probably gonna have to do the same thing on this, although I have no experience with the Toyota Sienna vans. If I pull this knob off, we can see inside of here there's a shaft where the knob went on, and then there's a nut down behind there. It's a little hard for you guys to see. I don't know if you can see it there or not. If I shine a light in there, it'll probably be too bright for you to see. But maybe that'll help a little bit. Just kind of glance some light off of there. So that silver nut is what holds the switch in place. So the problem is when the knobs get loose, even this knob's loose, this knob's loose, the blower knob is actually fairly tight, but it's a more robust switch. These other ones are just really, really lightweight switches. And I think they're fastened just by that little nut. When these switches get loose, there's a ribbon cable that attaches to them, and that ribbon cable can fracture from the vibration of this switch. So we probably have a bad solder joint or a bad ribbon cable back behind this unit. And I'm going to call the customer or check with the front desk, see how much time we have authorized, because I'm probably going to have to pull this whole assembly off and check those solder joints back behind here. We could probably tighten up the knob and get by for a while, but there's a chance that when we tighten the knob, it'll actually separate that solder joint the rest of the way, and it'll be constantly on full blast on the rear AC. Okay, I have the key off, just so we don't have to listen to the dinger or anything, but I want to get the shifter down. So if you're on a flat surface, that's great. If you're on a hill, then make sure your parking brake is set. You might chock the wheels just to be safe. We're going to push the I already pulled the little safety thing out of there. We're going to push down on the emergency release, which my fat finger won't fit in there. And I'm just going to move that down out of my way so that I can pull this, assembly out. Now, I've never pulled one of these out, so I don't know exactly, what is holding this thing on. Most of them are just, plastic clips. I don't see anything that comes off of there that would give me access to screws. So we're just going to see if this will pop off of here. Okay, maybe the side pieces come off first and then we have screws. Kind of looks that way. So most of this stuff you can just leave it hanging. Okay, so we have a couple of 10mm screws holding this panel in. It looks like the panel dips below this lower panel, so I'm hoping we don't have to take the lower panel off. We might be able to just kind of squeeze it out of there. So I'm just going to zip the these 10mm out. There's 4 of them holding this unit in. I see one over here that's attached to this lower panel. I'll probably just remove it as well, and it might give me a little extra play on that lower panel. Oh, I'm wrong. The radio does overlap it. I thought this piece was part of the vent. So there's 4 screws holding the radio. Some of them are down in there a little bit further. You might need an extension on your socket or a longer socket. These screws are different. These are going into metal. They have actual 6mm by 1.0 threads. They are not going into plastic, so these are a lot finer thread than the other screws. just so you don't mix them up. Now I'm going to try to not unplug the radio. I don't want to have to, reprogram the clock and radio stations. So if I can leave it just sitting there, up out of my way and get this out, then I will. Of course, this piece is going to be trapped underneath this panel, but it might squeeze out of there. There we go. And now we have a couple of connectors on the back. We're just going to unplug those. There's a little push button here. Push that in, wiggle that connector out. A bigger connector here with bigger wires. That's for the blower motor. We'll unplug that one. Kind of surprised they gave you a little see-through window into the circuit board. I don't know why. It's kind of strange, but we will take this over to the bench. We'll take some screws out of this panel, separate it, and get to where those knobs are, and we'll inspect to see if this has the same ribbon cables like my Highlander had. Looks like 4 screws holding this back panel on here. Trying to do this gently because there's a ribbon cable attached, which we may have to pop this panel up. And that might be why they gave us the clear panel here, so we can see that, hey, you got stuff connected. Okay, so we have the ribbon cable here. There's a little clip that holds it in place. So it's kind of the tan colored clip on the white connector. We're just going to lift that up, kind of hear it pop off, and then the ribbon cable will pull out. And then, now this panel comes off, and we can get down to the next deeper level here. So these are the switches here, and they're all kind of loose in there because the nuts are loose. I do see 3 solder joints here and 3 here, so there's probably a 3 conductor ribbon cable going from here to the main board. More than likely it's fractured on this knob here. This is the knob that was on the far right for the rear temperature. I'm going to flip this back over. We're going to pull the other knobs off and remove the nuts that hold them in place, because those switches are going to need to come out. Okay, that one might want to stay there. These switches are going to come out with that board. It looks like 11 millimeter on the nut. If you don't have metric stuff, 7/16 will work as well. I'm going to flip this over and rattle it a little bit. There we go. So those are the 3 nuts that came off of the switches. Flip it back over again, and I'm going to remove the screws on the circuit board here. We're going to leave the big blower motor switch in place, take out all these other ones. A couple of plastic clips holding the switch in. I'm not pulling up very hard, I'm just enough to get it off of those switches. And now we're going to lift this whole board up, hopefully. Okay, so down here there's a little slot in the board that kind of clips into the plastic. Go ahead and lift this up the rest of the way. We do have a 2-wire ribbon cable going over here. I'm guessing that's just for the light on this switch. Okay. Now we can set this out of our way and take a look at our ribbon cable. Okay, now I don't see any physical breaks in the ribbon cable, but there is kind of a kink mark down here, so it could be broken internally. The wires are still affixed to the solder joint. Let me flip this over. We can see our solder joints here and here. I don't see anything broken there. I'm just going to go ahead and replace this with just 3 pieces of wire. This one was acting up. The other ones weren't acting up, so I'm going to assume they're okay. We'll just, run single wires from each one of these positions, and then we'll put it back together. Just going to use some solder wick here to remove the solder from that ribbon cable. Since I'm not going to save the ribbon cable, if it was fighting me, then I would just, I'll just cut it and pull each strand off individually. Sometimes it's a little more difficult to remove, all of them at once. And actually, I wonder if that's our broken cable there. Yeah, that one's loose. And there's the break. So the break was just, hidden in solder. I'm just going to pull down on this switch. There we go. That third wire is the one that was broken. So looking at the end of the ribbon cable, we can see that one ear was broken off. What I did on the Highlander is I just cut all these flush, peeled back the insulation, which this is kind of a strange ribbon cable. It's not just round conductors, they're flat in there. Okay, yeah, we're going to run individual conductors. I just don't have quite enough of the round material left. So I'm just going to pull this ribbon cable off of here. See if I can burn myself. Okay, I'm just going to take a couple pieces of small wire. I don't even know what size this is. It's probably 22 gauge or 24 gauge. Now I don't need much. I might give myself a little more than what we had on this ribbon cable. Just to make it easier to work with. We'll go ahead and tin our wire just a little bit, just applying a little bit of solder to the wire before we insert it through the circuit board. Makes it to where we don't have to get it quite as hot on the circuit board to get the solder to stick. We don't want to put too much solder on it and make it difficult to get through the circuit board. So just real light coat. Now I think it's going to be easier if I solder these wires into the board first. So they go in from the bottom, and my leads are a little long. We can snip those off afterwards. We'll just get them all soldered in place to begin with. So I'm just going to snip these all the same length. I'll have to restrip 2 of them. I'll snip these other ones while I got the snippers out. Okay, so now we need to put those 3 wires through the switch. As long as I keep the orientation right, I can do it on this side of the board. I have a little more slack. We don't want to manipulate these wires too much because they still are a fairly small conductor. The more we bend them, especially near our solder joint, the more likely they are to break. So it would normally be, the switch would be in there like so. So I'm just going to, the wire colors are going to match there. We're going to flip it this way. So that way, when we're done soldering, we can just drop it back into place. Okay, so I got all 3 wires poked through there. We'll just go down the line and solder them all at once. Now, since the other knobs weren't as loose as this knob, I'm not going to replace those ribbon cables. We'll just make sure that we get everything tight when we go back together. So now we just need to reassemble everything. So we have to get each one of these controls to fall through the panel as we assemble this. We have our circuit board for the light. We'll line that up onto its locating tabs. Now these switches do stick up higher than the circuit board, just slightly. Okay, so those are all in place. Probably best to do this by hand, but if you are using power tools, make sure that you're either going very gently or your tool has a clutch on it. And we need one more screw in this light for the blower motor switch. So before we put the back panel on, let's go ahead and tighten up these switches. We'll flip this back over. Drop the one washer that fell off back onto that center switch. If you want an easy way to do this, you can just stick the nut on a screwdriver, line the screwdriver up over the shaft. You can drop the nut. You don't have to risk the nut falling down into the circuit board anywhere. Take our 11mm, go ahead and snug these back up. Now for the rest of this process, we're just going to kind of reverse the disassembly process. And just keep in mind that everything we're tightening onto with the nuts and the screws are all plastic. So try not to over tighten them because they will strip out fairly easy. Even though I use power tools to put stuff together, I have it set to a very low torque setting. So just like when we took it apart at the beginning, this ribbon cable is clipped in to this connector. So make sure that that locking tab is lifted up. It's kind of a tan locking tab in the white connector. We'll push the ribbon cable back into place. Make sure it's fully seated. Then we will seat the locking tab. Now it doesn't really snap into place. You can just feel it get tight. And then I'll probably have to, re-glue this back into place. And maybe the tape is still sticky enough to hold it. Just as a precaution, I will run just a piece of tape over it. Should be all good to go. Now we can just throw it back in the vehicle and test it out. Okay, I just went ahead and put everything back in. Put the shifter back up into park, put the little thing back into place. Turn the key on. We'll check our front system first, make sure I didn't mess anything up. So I got high speed there. The first click is rear controls. The rear control is turned off at this point. We'll go low. Now the rear does have like a delay before it kicks in, but we have all the speeds there. I'll start it up, make sure that you guys won't be able to hear it, but I'll make sure that my different fan positions work, make sure that I can feel a difference in temperature. So it looks like everything is working. So I'm going to call this one fixed. Okay, so it really wasn't too bad to fix. It does require some soldering skills, a few tools, but I'm sure that this is much cheaper to repair than it is to replace the entire unit. I didn't even price it out from Toyota, and being that it's in 2008, it's probably an item that may be limited availability. So fixing it may be the only option. Very similar to my Highlander. I have another video for that one. Just broken ribbon cable because the knobs come loose. So if you guys are noticing that your stuff all works good, but your knobs are loose, then you might just want to pop the knobs off and use an 11mm socket just by hand and snug up the little nuts that hold those switches in place to prevent the switch from failing in the future. Okay, questions or comments, put those down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.